Welcome to our third part of our Genealogy Beginner Series, Building and Researching Your Family Tree. I'm Bill Buckner, and today's topic is secondary resources. Today we're going to talk about secondary resources. What are they? What are their value? When do you use them in your research? We hope that you enjoy our presentation today and learn something from it. So let's get started. And first thing I want to talk about is records themselves. In general terms, you need to understand that our ancestors created records just like we do today. We buy land, we vote, we took the census this year, we get married, we live and we die in our communities and create records along the way. The trick is finding out what has survived and what has genealogical value. And for our research, genealogical value is defined as relationships, those records that say that this person is a son or daughter of this couple. Also names and dates and places that help identify where your ancestor lived in a given time and place. So the kinds of records we look at in research are vital: family histories, newspapers, census, military, court, land, and so many more. So let's talk a little more about records. Please remember that there is a finite set of genealogical records of value or of interest for your research. Remember that the genealogical proof standard, the ultimate standard that we strive toward, states to do an exhaustive search. And sometimes that means just looking at all available records and providing a preponderance of evidence, and you'll have to make a decision based on what you have available. Now, I want us to talk about digital records. Digital records are the kinds of records that we see quite frequently nowadays with digital databases, digital access to the internet. There are some problems with digital records, including junk genealogy. This is the uncritical presentation of unsourced guesses. The plus is that citing your sources has become more prevalent. So be aware that there are people that have just clicked and pulled up stuff about their ancestors or who they think they are with no resources cited or quoted, and you have to deal with that today. Unable to study the end record in context. Cemetery records or census records are a good example of this, where in the census you may have a family split on two different pages. The index takes you to one page but not the other. In a cemetery you may find a certain record, a certain tombstone, but not be able to see the records around that to determine that these are family members. It's also difficult to remember that there are other sources of information available to us in their original form. Sometimes we get so fixated on using a certain product like Ancestry that we forget like vital records, death records for Texas are not only available in Ancestry, but also in Family Search. And sometimes those records are there when we don't find them in one source or the other. And then there's what we call digital rot. Experts agree that today's digital records probably will not survive and be readable as they were originally intended. The lifespan of digital content, well, we don't really know. Just one bad sector in a file can cause it to lock up, freeze up, or just not be available anymore. And then there's technology obsolescence. Remember floppy disk? Well, I've got floppy disk in my office that you just can't use anymore. And also file formats, a digital file, our JPEGs, our TIFF files, what will the future hold for us? Will there be a new format that we have to convert to? And do we have the operating and the hardware systems to run those? Now there are advancements with digital records. One thing we see today is records are being geocoded, especially like our cemetery records that people are providing, where you can go with the geocode, the GPS code, where that tombstone is in a large cemetery is really advantage to us doing research. So we also need to think about access to records. Records can be here today and gone tomorrow. So a tip is when you find it, document and save it and print it or digitize it for your records. Records come and go for all kinds of reasons. As we talked about technology, there might be legal reasons. The records might not have been available legally for the public at the time you found them. There might be a financial reason. A company's going out of business, owner of a site dies, maybe a contract ends, protection of personal information. That's a biggie that is in the law a lot, legislative a lot. The idea that we need to protect personal identity information from vital records. And maybe the government that owns the records may see them as a source of income and take them away from the public sector. Just some headlines in the last few years of what's happened with records. You will see this on a daily basis almost, of fights by different organizations to keep records that we have access to free and public so that others can use them. So let's talk more about records. They might be in their original form, handwritten. Always try to view the record for yourself if possible. A lot of times with the old handwriting, how that record is transcribed or translated or even compiled, like minutes are compiled in the court, maybe even reconstructed or indexed. That all depends on that original record. So try to view that record yourself. And then these are other types of ways that you see records. So let's have a little test to see where we are with information about secondary records. So I had a patron who wanted to know which date of birth to use. The grandfather was born in Mexico. She had found 3 different dates of birth. She had a baptismal record recorded 5 days after birth, a death certificate that had a birth record with different year, but the month and date were the same, a tombstone record, same year, but different month and date. So she had some conflict. So what is primary? What's the answer? Well, hopefully you said that the answer was the baptismal record. And why? Because a primary record is a statement by an informant that was knowledgeable, participant in an event, or an eyewitness. As close to the event as possible is what we're looking for. A secondary source is a statement by an informant that did not actually participate in an event and did not actually witness the event. So what is a secondary source? It's a document or record not created at the time of the event, often provided by someone recollecting the past, a compilation, an index, an abstract, a transcription. That is usually a clue when you say, is this secondary or not? May not be completely accurate, may have left out some details, but gives us clues that are helpful. And those clues that it might be helpful is when we say, when do you use secondary resources? At the beginning of your research. So that is why, as a genealogy beginner, you might want to think about using some of these secondary resources at the beginning of your research. When you're looking for a clue to get past a certain roadblock in your research, secondary sources sometimes give you that place or that time or that name that you didn't know about before, and especially when there's not a primary source available to you. And you use them in conjunction with primary resources, that reasonable exhaustive search that we talked about, the genealogical proof standard. So what types of records are secondary? Let's just take a look at a few. Newspapers. Newspapers are typically reporting on an event, but not necessarily an eyewitness to an event. Family histories, periodicals, family trees, pedigree charts, surname requests, queries, census indexes. Remember, the census and transcriptions and abstracts are all secondary. Cemetery inventories, what's on the tombstone, you do not know when that tombstone was actually put on the ground. So it could be 50 years, 100 years after the event. County histories, city directories. Surely city directories are primary. We don't know where the information for city directories comes from. It's just kind of magical, it's there. But what source? I've never seen a source quoted in a city directory. Indexes, oral histories. Well, oral histories is definitely, why would you say oral histories are secondary? Because the person sometimes that is speaking is recollecting an event maybe through a second person. So you have to kind of weigh back and forth what is primary, what is secondary with oral histories. And family Bibles. We always say to look at the description of those, was the handwriting all the same or was it different? So let's talk a little bit first about family histories. Sometimes you get lucky and someone else has done the work for you, but you always want to validate the information for yourself. Now, before computers, and that's roughly about 20 years ago, we were lucky just to identify the existence of a family history and its location. This meant purchasing the book, checking the book out of a library, perhaps getting someone to make us a copy, taking notes. Family histories were identified through genealogical magazines. And Genealogical Helper is one magazine that was nationally used by genealogists to post notices of family histories, your local catalog in a library, or sometimes those print catalogs that we had back in the day, and bibliographies. So this is an important slide in that this gives you some links to some of that digital content. So for bibliographic records, records that as a family history existed, you would want to go to worldcat.org and search by name. We'll talk about that in a minute. FamilySearch.org, we've talked about how to access that resource. Digital books, you have Internet Archives, you have HaTrust, and family books on Family Search site. There are more than 350,000 family histories and county histories, genealogical books on that site, digital content-wise. And digital records such as Archive Grid and Gen Gophers have a lot of digital content. So let's just take a look at Family Search and how you would search the book section of Family Search. You'd log into Family Search, then you'd go to Search and click on Books. And at that point, you can enter a place, a name, or a keyword, such as Rockmore. Many books are accessible from home. Some have specific locations. Others that are not digitized must be accessed at the Family History Library itself. So once you click on a record, you want to look at the access level. And that is down there where it says public. That is the access level. So for this record, it's public view. Some are protected, and it'll say protected based on copyright or some other restriction on how that record was put in the system. Some of them are not all digital. Some of them are just telling you where the location is. But if you do click on a digital record, you can either view the record by clicking on all the information. You also want to look at the source of that information. So that would help you if you want to go look at the original book itself. Now, once you log into a digital book in any system, it seems that you can then search by keyword. And so you want to look at those tools at the very bottom. The magnifying glass looks right here. That's a magnifying that's pretty standard. That will let you search the full text of the item for a word or a phrase. The T icon, in this case for Family Search, has a digital, not a transcription of the text of that book. So maybe the book text is not that great, but there's been a digital text of that. You can also zoom in, zoom out, change from positive to negative, and then you use the arrows to flip through the pages. So in this case, we put in the search for Peter, and it pops up on the screen, so you can easily see if you're looking for a particular Peter Rockmore, if that is your ancestor. If material is protected, you want to take note of, like in WorldCat, you want to take note of where that item is located. So you would do a search in WorldCat, which is a national bibliographic tool. searches a wide scope of library catalogs at one time, there may be multiple results for the same title. You want to look at all of those. Once you click on one, it will list the libraries closest to you. And so in this case, there were 3 pages before we saw Waco McLennan County Library. So don't just think it's done by zip code. You see the zip code there. And so it's not the greatest thing. It's not the perfect thing. So you need to kind of search through the multiple pages to see if there is a library close to you. Another secondary source that I just love are periodicals. And periodicals may be the only place a piece of information is published. A small cemetery, a transcript of a ship arrival, an index to records that burned. Kurt Witcher, who runs the Genealogy Center in Allen County in Fort Wayne, Indiana, estimates that if you don't consult periodicals in your research, you could be missing up to 30% of the research leads for your research. That's huge. So let me step back for a second and have you ask yourself, how do we determine the value of any resource in terms of genealogical research? A high value, something that we think is really high. The publication gives you something about your ancestor that you didn't know. We always hold those records in high esteem. It's easy to access, readily available. It's either online, in print, it's everywhere. It's indexed with a full name index that references pages, not some hidden numbering system. What else do you consider high value? Low value is that publication that you used 20 years ago that you didn't find your ancestor. It didn't have an index, or maybe it had a surname index and there were 50,000 pages of Smiths or your surname listed. The issue that you needed is missing. It cost you money to get. That's how we value things. And so I want to try to change your opinion on periodicals. The value of periodicals is that it's periodic. It could come out next week with something about your ancestor. It's over a period of time and it's periodic. And so it's records that are about surnames and places. It can be specific to a surname or a place that your ancestor lived or a period of time. It's also typically newsworthy and up to date. So I want to challenge you, especially about periodicals, to take the time to try and use periodicals as a resource for your family history. Now, just some basic types of periodicals: family periodicals, genealogical society, whether it's national, state, regional, they come out quarterly, newsletters, journals, parallel historical society publications. There are hereditary organizations like the DAR. General or hobby genealogy magazines have information that is valuable as well. Just the scope of periodicals, there are roughly about 8,000 genealogical titles and about 3,000 are defunct. So which type of periodical is most likely to give you the best result for high value? Family periodicals. These are published as part of a membership. Individuals publish them. There are also some long-run family periodicals. And what's inside? You have family history on that particular line. Here in this case, the Presley line series on family. There might be officer reports, queries from other members, information exchange, calendar events, and an index. Where to find clues if your surname has a family periodicals? Well, going back to WorldCat, plugging your surname in. Digital content might be through Hati Trust, those digital sites that we talked about, family associations, and the internet. Now here is a record, I think it's a good example. The standard for a bibliographic utility like WorldCat or Family Search uses the surname and the word family and then the added word periodical. So this is the standard. And for USREY, the standard is USREY. Now note that the author is spelled USRY and that the bulletin that he published, Mr. USREY, it also has a different spelling. So you will find variations in surnames, but there is a standard and you want to find out what that standard is through a bibliographic utility. Family organizations, there's a wiki with family search that helps you identify those family organizations. And then a lot of these family organizations are online. We used to get a print index to family associations back in 2001. That was the last time it was published. But you'll see why today is that family organizations have an internet presence. Society publications. This is the second probably most helpful type of periodical. There's national, state, regional, county, and your local. And what's inside of those? Roughly the same types of information, queries, source material, family information. There's something called Orphan Records. We'll talk about that in a second. Some examples: family history, cemetery inventories, military records, indexes and abstracts of various records. So the value of genealogical or historical society publications logically is that the content is of genealogical historical society in a geographic place. So if it was McLennan County, the Central Texas Genealogical Society publications probably would be a good source to look for. And this is one of the benefits of being a member of a society where your ancestors lived. Even if you don't live there today, by supporting those organizations, you support the publication and the research that goes on that might benefit you in the long run. So how to find same places, how to find these society publications, same places. Now, WorldCat, Family Search, also by just looking at the geographic place itself. Call the local library. Local libraries know what organizations exist or have existed in their communities. So here's a family search. Instead of having a family surname and the word family in periodicals, we look at the geographic place and look for the word periodicals. Here is Smith County, and it identifies two titles down here. East Texas Family Records and Wood County Genealogical Society. Here's a different record for Navarro County. And in this record, it tells us that the title of the publication is Navarro Leaves and Branches. So that was a plus. We find that it's indexed by something called Percy and that this title is not in a digital format. Now, I talked about orphan records, and this is where periodicals and an index would be very helpful. So in this case, somebody that was living in Austin wrote and sent to an Arizona State Genealogical Society naturalizations for Austin County, not Austin, Texas, but Austin County, the Belleville area outside of Brenham. And so this is how, so that in a periodical, you can get records not just from the geographic area, but from far away. And that's where an index is going to be very valuable to you. So did Mr. Oates move to Texas and send his farmer society this information? That's a probably good choice as an answer. So how do we make this information available? Through indexes. And the index of indexes we'll talk about in a minute. But first, a few things about print indexes. So publisher indexes is in each issue, each volume. There might be multiple year accumulations, ability to search by keyword. They might be online. Compiled indexes, compiling multiple volumes of different titles that are bound together by subject. And there's sometimes a hard part about periodicals is you find an index, but how do you find the actual periodical? There's digital sources, those same ones that had access to digital county histories and family histories have some digital periodicals. And the index that we want to talk about is Percy. It's published by the Periodical Source Index. So here's a quick look at an issue or a volume index. Now, typically the volume index is in the first issue of the following year. So this is volume 20, and it came out in, for volume 19, it came out in the volume 20 first issue. A cumulative index might have multiple years, okay? An online presence index might be broken down by surnames, by county focus, might be keyword searchable. cumulative index. Now, I want to really point this out. There are indexes that have been made over the years, and this is called the SWIM index. It has roughly, I think, 8 different Virginia works of very prominent works, and it's in print, and it indexes all those books, those magazines, and yet it's not online except for one place, and that is in the Earl Gregg Swim Library at the College of William and Mary. It's not on Ancestry. It's not online digitally somewhere. So you need to think in terms of 50 years ago, 75 years ago, things were being indexed. Where are those indexes? So let's talk about Percy. It's a primary master index. It's mean for primary source index. It was produced by the staff of the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Its value, Frederick Wirtz, Find My Past, stated, genealogy experts agree that periodical source index, i.e. Percy, is one of the most underutilized resources out there. And I agree with that. It's available now through findmypast.com. You can search the index and find a citation. If you subscribe, you might be able to click on the digital content. Not everything is digital as far as content if you subscribe. It has a huge amount of records in it. And so where we want to look at, it has about 3,000 of those defunct titles. It does not cover access to family periodicals. That's one of the things you need to know. It is subject-based. It's not a every name index. You can search surnames in it, though. Roughly 8,000 publications. Some are linked, as I said, to digital content. Not all. They are working to do that, I think. And it's only available through findmypast.com. And it has records of the US, Canada, Britain, Ireland, and Australia. So this is the link that you will need to click on to get to Percy through Find My Past. And when you click on that link, you're going to get the who, where, and the what Find My Past. And I want to show you quickly, there are filters on here. And one of the filters you can put is you put in a surname and filter it by publication title. So if you know where your ancestor lived, a good search would be your surname and the publication that you discovered as to that geographic area. In my case, it is the Bandera County Historian in Bandera County, Texas. So I put in Buckner and that filtered to that particular title. And I got 4 hits, and every one of these 4 hits are my direct ancestors. And so I hope that you can try this out and see for yourself that there is value in these periodical articles. Now, another type of secondary source that we talk about are pedigree charts and queries and family trees. So remember, libraries buy, published pedigree charts. Typically they're by a location or a society, but family trees today, you find them on Ancestry public trees. They're either private or they're public. They were part of RootsWeb, some of them from a place called World Connect, and that's a great place to look for GEDCOM files. Family Search has family trees, and then of course, and the printed ones by members of societies. Now, Family Search Tree, there's a new movement afoot to use what we call a R-tree format or a uniform type of tree where it's not individuals that are publishing trees, but it's one big tree. And so you basically start a tree or you find there's a tree there and you add to it, and it allows us all to input to the same tree. I seriously believe that in the future, we won't be about who our ancestors are, but who they were because of this type of documentation of family history. It's great for collaboration, share photos, stories. There's a means to debate whether the information is factual, and so that's very valuable as well. Message boards. RootsWeb message boards were moved to Ancestry. You can still search these for free. Message boards are a place, instead of doing the old-fashioned query, it's basically an online thread on a particular question or surname or place or an event. MyHeritage, there's another place, is another type of source that has an index available for Everton's Genealogical Helper. And this magazine came out monthly. It was from 47 to 2007. It was nationwide, and people used it for all kinds of things, for articles, for queries, for surname research. Once you find an index, a name in the index, we have access to most of these titles in our collection. So this is what a query looked like. A very abbreviated, you would run it like a one ad, and people would read the magazine monthly and see that there was somebody that was looking for possibly your ancestors' information, and they could correspond. And that's what a lot of people remember as queries. So remembering your research and for secondary resources, always reevaluate the resource itself. Ask yourselves if it's primary, secondary, where is the source of information coming from? Search resources by individual name, surname, and place, not just through the index, by looking at the table of contents and other factors. Be systematic in your search. Search thoroughly through each ancestor, each resource for each ancestor through every resource that you can find, and be patient with yourself and your research. We thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.